Hello, ladies and gents! With Halloween on our doorstep, let's ace today something really scary. The French Tier 7 heavy tank, the AMX M4 45. Now, of course, it's not that the enemies would be afraid of it, it's more the people who know that have to grind through it to get to those juicy French auto-loading heavy tanks. The AMX M4 is not really a fan favorite to say the least, and with good reason too. But after acing it twice already, I think it's not as hopeless as most would think. Be as it may, what's for sure is that this thing only ever existed in blueprints, so I had to come up with a different topic for today's article on the WARTIME blog. I think I came up with a good one though, as the largest ever naval engagement could be quite interesting to quite a few of you, especially if you are also playing World of Warships. So, if you want to check it out, just hit that link in the description below. As for today's subject, we will of course have a look later at the details during the gameplay, but for now let's have a really quick look at its armor profile and why it pretty much sucks. So, to give you the short version, it does because it just simply doesn't have enough armor to be able to weather the storm. And the slightly longer version is that the only really tough parts on it are behind the gun mantlet, which is actually quite strong, and on the sides and the top of the turret, which are an autobahn zone thanks to all that rounding. Right next to the gun mantlet, however, already 110 to 120 mm of penetration will be well enough to put a hole right in front of your turret, and the hull isn't exactly tough either, despite all that angling that's going on down there. And worst of all, you can't even side scrape with it against a lot of the opponents, because the only 40 mm of side armor means that all those 122 mm Soviet guns, and of course anything above, will just simply overmatch it anyway. So, moral of the story, if you try to play this thing aggressively against anything but super low tier tanks, you gonna have a bad time. And with that said, let's take it out for a spin to see how the hell you can use it then effectively. Alright, so here we are in our AMX M4 45, this time around in a standard battle on Tundra. Now looking at the matchmaking, it has been kinda generous to us actually. I mean sure, about a third of the team is tier 8, but the rest is tier 7 and tier 6, so there should be plenty of stuff on the enemy team that we really should not have any problem penetrating. Talking about penetrating stuff, the gun we have on this thing is actually an improved version of the same gun that we had at tier 6 on the ARL-44. Which is kinda good news, cause that gun was pretty amazing at tier 6, and it's still very much usable at tier 7 as well. 212 mm of penetration is kinda nice. It's basically what you have on some of the better tier 8 mediums, and 240 alpha damage is... it's alright, especially as you have a relatively decent rate of fire. But don't expect the same stopping power that you would have on some of the other heavies. I'm looking at you, Soviet heavies most of all. Other than that, it's relatively accurate, 0.35 meter dispersion. You also have a 10 degrees of gun depression, so the overall gun handling really is kinda alright. The only thing that's a little bit lacking is probably the aim time. It's not as bad as on the ARL, which was measurable in years pretty much. But you still have to aim for about 2.8 seconds before you can pull the trigger, which can be a lot if you are facing a lot of enemies. Talking about facing a lot of enemies, we managed to pop into quite a few of them on the other side of this rock. But they all pulled back, so I see there is a chance that I can move into position up on the hill, so I will grab it with both hands, and luckily I managed to get away with it too. Now the hill on the Tundra map is so amazingly important that it's worth to take the risk to be able to get in a good position here. You are able to take shots on pretty much most of the map, and wow, that's a juicy little fire there. Can we have a second one? Oh, we actually can, but the Stürer steals the kill. Bloody hell. So the hill has been taken, and we already managed to take a couple of nice, lovely shots. Unfortunately, the Scorpion just pulls back in time. And the AMX is actually not bad at sniping. I mean, you don't have to place it at the back of the map and pretend to be a tank destroyer, but it's definitely more of a second line assault tank. because it's so squishy, if the enemy has the possibility to choose between a much tougher target than you, well, guess who they will be shooting at. Now at the same time, it can gather quite a bit of speed. Although it has only a 35 km per hour top speed and a 15 horsepower per ton power to weight ratio, it still feels like one of the more mobile heavy tanks. I mean, it's not lightning fast. Again, I'm looking at here some of you Soviet heavies. But it's decent enough to actually be able to get into position, to be outflanking the things that are engaging the more heavily armored foes. By the way, just going back a little bit about the positioning on the map. Knowing where to bring a support heavy is pretty much the difference between playing it successfully and just sucking at it completely. And that's because if I would have brought this thing on the usual heavy tank position, which is on the one line, well, first of all I would have been alone, which is bad in itself. But that's not really a position where you want to bring this thing, unless it's absolutely necessary, because you will encounter so many other heavies that are in a much more strong position there, hull down, behind cover, side scraping. You can utilize none of that. So, let's not put yourself in a situation where you are at a disadvantage. If you can keep on punishing tanks that are completely out of position, now that's something that's a lot juicier. Gets smacked down here by the artillery, but very soon he will have VLC problems, so hopefully this was the last time we are getting bothered by the artillery. And by the way, you are an absolute artillery magnet, so be prepared that if you present yourself to be a juicy target like I did there, and I was definitely not paying attention, then you will pay the price for it. But as you see, if you keep up with the battle, trying to get into flanking positions, you can actually have a decent result with this thing. I mean, the health pool on itself will allow to take a couple of shots, but don't expect your armor to actually work out. And we are already here at 2300 damage, so with that rate of fire of over 7 rounds a minute, you can definitely put in some decent damage. Now this thing will of course struggle against tier 9s, which it will definitely meet, but you have the APCR option, which is relatively decent, should be able to take on anything that you will encounter. And well, against the Scorpion, it won't really be a challenge to penetrate that guy. Now let's move up. A slower heavy tank would have been left behind already, probably around the hill. And also here, it's really good that we have this kind of speed, although not amazing, it's just enough to get into a position, especially as our FCM decided to sacrifice itself with that T-34, allowing us to move in and at least put one more shot into it. And the damage hunting at the end of the battle is more important than most people realize. So, this was then my ace tanker in the AMX M4 45, a machine that's one of those weird support heavies out there. Now this time around we were actually lucky enough to have the opportunity to use it as such, and it also rewarded us with an ace tanker and a Confederate in a tier 8 match. Not too shabby. All of this was achieved with scoring 2760 damage, 2 kills and close to 1200 base XP. Thanks to our relatively good mobility and our aggressive but careful gameplay, we could put ourselves into positions that allowed us to keep us firing, something that some of the more cumbersome heavies might not have been able to do actually. Last but not least, we fired 13 shots, hitting every single one of them and doing actual damage with all but one too. Not bad at all if I do say so myself. Our armor on the other hand couldn't deflect any of the 3 shots received, so as pretty much expected, we couldn't really rely on it to save our armored hide. Alright, this was then the AMX M4 45. I really hope that I could help some of you to get through it with relatively few headaches. And if you found this video useful or at least entertaining, thanks a lot for considering giving this a like or sharing it. Next up, we will have some really cool gameplay over the weekend, brought to you by an ELC AMX scoring a whopping 9 kills, and an STB-1 reaping an amazing 8000 damage hole in the enemy team's health pool. But as for myself, let me already wish you an excellent weekend ahead. Thank you very much for watching all week, and I hope to see you soon again next week with the usual schedule. Take care, and see you soon.